A few days ago, a government order pulled Anthropic's two strongest AI models offline for every customer on Earth. Since yesterday's coverage of the ongoing developments on this story, two new things have landed, both of them unprecedented. As a brief recap, the Commerce Department forced Anthropic to disable Fable 5 and the model underneath it, Mythos 5, worldwide under export controls. The June 13th episode covered the original mechanics. Yesterday's episode covered who reportedly set it off. Amazon's Andy Jassy warning officials his researchers had coaxed cyber attack info out of the model. The first of the two unprecedented things. There's an independent benchmark called the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Frontier. It tracks the single most capable model anyone can actually use. For its whole existence, that line only ever went up. Within hours of the Fable shutdown, it ticked down, a reversal that I don't think has ever been seen. You pull the two best models on the planet out of circulation and the most watched gauge of what any person can reach went backward. The frontier itself retreated. Second one, and this is where it gets kind of murky. Semaphore reported the restrictions were driven partly by intelligence, suggesting that a China-linked group had access to Mythos. The fear there is something called distillation, where you train a cheaper competing model on a powerful model's outputs, and you siphon off some of its capability without ever stealing the original thing itself. So access to a frontier model is the asset, and that is the worry. Now watch the accounts split. The White House framed the shutdown as national security necessity and, per reporting, scorned the company as obsessed with safety for everyone except themselves. A Trump advisor, David Sachs, said that Anthropic was warned and refused to patch. Anthropic, for its part, called the whole vulnerability a, quote, narrow potential jailbreak that wasn't unique to its own models. Which is correct, by the way, but even so, their own actions do seem to at least be partially to blame. The same danger that they spent months sizing in apocalyptic terms, they're now downplaying. And here's the really interesting point. Anthropic told Semaphore the government never raised Chinese access during the export conversations at all. And Semaphore said it could not establish how the government reached the China suspicion or if there was even any evidence to back it. So you've got a lab, a cloud giant, and an administration all narrating the same 24 hours, each in the version that flatters themselves. That divergence is data. Nobody has shown any underlying evidence. The administration gets a sweeping precedent here, pull a private model offline on 90 minutes notice, while Anthropic gets distance from the story that its flagship is uniquely dangerous. Neither account is settled fact, so as always, you should hold both at arm's length. And the new precedent is now percolating into other actions as well. An administration official told Axios that any future model crossing Mythos' capability bar will now have to clear the government before release, a one-time shutdown becoming a standard review. Now, the larger pattern, though, the same state, named in the Access sphere, China, is the one that in the same stretch between 2021 and 2025 revoked or suspended roughly 12,200 university degree programs, most of them arts and humanities, while opening about 10,200 new ones in fields like embodied intelligence. That is a coherent national push. Acquire frontier access, build sovereign alternatives, retool who your young people are trained to become. One strategy executed across three different fronts. And the control that this order puts out reaches exactly one company, Anthropic only. Rival labs are untouched. In the same window, the Chinese lab Z.AI open-sourced a 1 million token coding model under the banner Frontier Intelligence Belongs to Everyone. India's founders, as we said yesterday, reopened the case for sovereign models. Europe is calling this a wake-up call. You can pull two named models off the board, but you cannot pull the capability. It's already living in open weights and sovereign stacks. So closing your hand on it is like closing your hand on water. So let's shift now to a different friction, where that wealth lands and who it leaves behind. Tech layoffs just hit their highest single month in nearly 2 years. Nearly 40,000 cuts, and AI was the most cited reason for the layoffs. That's the third month running where that has been the case. The pace for the year works out to be about 974 people a day. That is 44% faster than just last year. Now put that next to what else happened on the same news ledger. Cerebras minted 2 billionaires on its IPO. SpaceX's first trading day, which we covered a couple of days ago on June 13th, turned its owner into a paper trillionaire and roughly 4,400 of its employees into millionaires, above a $2 trillion valuation. Anthropic and OpenAI are both inching toward public markets near $1 trillion each. For most of the industrial era, the machine or the innovation that took a job and the fortune that it built showed up in different towns, even sometimes in different decades. They very rarely had to sit on the same page. This new condition, though, is that they do. A $170 million mansion and an 8,000-person layoff just days apart on a single screen, while 76% of Americans are naming the cost of living as their top concern. Now, there still is a real fight about the cause underneath all of this. Mark Andreessen called AI the silver bullet excuse for cuts that are really about pandemic overhiring. Jack Dorsey, after cutting nearly half his company, eventually admitted he had overhired. And honestly, I think it's both. AI is genuinely absorbing work, and AI is also a convenient label for a correction that managers wanted anyway. It sounds like strategy instead of a mea culpa. The worker shown the door can't tell which one signed the notice, and that asymmetry is the whole story. And look at both ends of the pipeline reacting here. China steering those 12,200 degree programs toward tech fields at the front end, like we mentioned before, and two leading labs, Anthropic and OpenAI, floating guaranteed income and universal capital account ideas at the back end, both just recently. When the people building the thing start drawing up redistribution blueprints, that is a sign that the fence is already under strain. Here's the plain version. For generations now, the windfall and the wreckage stayed politely out of frame from each other. This week, they are landing in the same frame, and a gain that arrives beside the layoff in the same cycle on that same screen, that's one that no system gets to keep deferring. Now to the best news of the day, and it comes out of a lab in mice, so I'm going to be careful with how it lands, of course. Prime editing is the most precise way that science has found to rewrite DNA. It can write nearly any small change at an exact spot in a living cell without the blunt double-strand breaks that older tools rely on. The editing itself was never the problem. The wall was always a delivery method, getting the bulky three-part editing machinery into a living body in a form that actually works, can be given more than once, and doesn't linger long enough to do collateral damage. A team reporting in Nature Nanotechnology just took a real swing at that wall. They built a system for tuning lipid-nanoparticles. Those are the tiny synthetic fat bubbles that carry mRNA in the recent vaccines, and they tuned them specifically for prime editing's heavy payload. The result, 49% average editing in mouse liver from a single low dose. In a mouse model of phenylketonuria, an inherited metabolic disease, they corrected the disease-causing mutation and pushed blood phenylalanine down to levels that they described as anticipated to be curative. Now, three things sit underneath that headline number. The nanoparticle route produced fewer off-target edits than DNA-based delivery. It caused only a brief, transient bump in liver enzymes, no observed long-term toxicity. And because the carrier is synthetic, not viral, you can dose it again and again. Viral delivery usually only works once. The immune system learns to block it on the second try. A synthetic carrier you can give repeatedly, each round building on the last. Now, the careful part. This is demonstrated capability in mice, not a therapy that a patient can request. What comes next is, of course, regulatory work, manufacturing, human trials, years of it. For a long time, the precision of gene editing and the safety of delivering it have just sat in tension. The most exact tool tied to the riskiest way of getting it inside the body. That trade-off is the thing that is now coming apart. The diseases that this widens toward the clinic, such as sickle cell, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, several retinal disorders, those aren't theoretical anymore. The wall that kept the precision in a dish only is the wall that this paper just put a huge hole in. All right, shifting to our last story, and this is the structural mirror of where we started today. During the same news cycle here, that a state could pull the single most capable model off the board, a group called OpenRouter, you've probably heard of them, published a result showing why that gate is leakier than it actually looks. The method is called fusion. You send one prompt to a panel of models at once, then a judge model reads every answer, where they agree, where they clash, and what each one uniquely caught, and writes a final answer grounded in all of it. One API call. They tested it on 100 hard, deep research tasks from Perplexity's Draco benchmark, academic research, finance, law, medicine. Each scored against roughly 39 weighted criteria. A benchmark built to resist gaming. And here are the numbers. A panel of 3 budget models, Gemini 3 Flash, Kimi K2.6, and DeepSeek V4 Pro scored 64.7%. On their own, those three are middling. Gemini 3 Flash alone scored 43.1%, the lowest of anything tested, but fused together, they beat ChatGPT 5.5, which solo scored 60%. They also beat Claude Opus 4.8, which scored 58.8%. The budget trio topped GPT 5.5 by 4.7 points and Opus by 5.9, at roughly half the cost. 3 cheap models working together beat 2 frontier systems working alone. And it does go the other way too. If you use a frontier model into the panel, you climb higher than any single model can reach. Fable 5 plus GPT 5.5 hit 69%, higher than either of them did alone. Now, why does this work? Because different models make different mistakes and have different strengths. A judge that can see every answer routes around any one model's blind spots. OpenRouter's Atala called it neurodiversity, not single model takeovers. So intelligence is emerging from disagreement, not from one single model's dominance. And 2 of those 3 budget models came from labs outside the US. 2 are open weight. The pieces are already in everyone's hands. So the plain payoff is this. Deep research quality that recently meant paying for one frontier model can now be assembled from cheaper parts that catch each other's errors at lower cost, with no dependence on any single provider staying online. The architecture that made a 90-minute global shutdown possible, one model, one company, and one switch, is now the architecture that this breakthrough makes optional. All right, let's bring it home for today. Every gate that got thrown up in the last few days rested on the same quiet assumption that capability lives in a model that you can name, that if you can name it, you can hold it, restrict it, switch it off. And every one of them got disproved in the same few days. A government pulled the 2 best models offline, and the frontier benchmark ticked backwards while open weights of comparable power shipped freely the same week. Layoffs and fortunes landed on one screen, and the people building the machine started sketching the floor that has to come before the old one gives way. A delivery wall that kept gene editing in a dish came apart in a lab, and 3 cheap models, pooled and judged, nearly matched the single biggest one at half the cost. That last fact, that's important. The thing that old logic said would concentrate advantage, one giant model owned and gated, instead distributed it. Capability turned out to be closer to water than a vault. You can close your hand around it. You can even hold some of it for a while, but it finds the level. It always finds the level. So what's filling in everywhere outside the gate this week? The sovereign stacks, the open weights, the budget ensembles, the medicine moving from dish toward clinic. That is the build. That's where this is actually heading. We'll see you tomorrow.